Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Queer in Progress Timeline Online Archive official launch. That's a bit of a mouthful, and hopefully I won't have to say that too many times again tonight. I'm Hannah Tiernan, the lead researcher on the Queer in Progress Timeline, and the current custodian and kind of co-editor of the online archive. So welcome and thanks for being here, and happy Trans Day of Visibility to everybody out there and to all of our trans people who will be involved and anybody who's watching. And it's a very important day to mark. We're delighted to be here on behalf of Project Art Centre and teaming up with GCN. And we've got a great lineup of guests who will be discussing some of the topics that are on the timeline and also some of the issues that are very close to their own hearts. And before we get started on that, we're going to talk to Livia Paldi, the outgoing curator of visual arts at Project Art Centre. And Livia was actually the kind of brainchild behind the initiative. So she's going to be explaining a bit about what the initiative is and how it came about. And also we'll be talking to Lisa Connell, the managing editor of GCN, and getting a bit of kind of insight into how GCN came on board with us. So before we get started with that, we're going to just watch a very quick kind of walkthrough video of the project's website and how to navigate the timeline. So here we are on the projectartcentre.ie website, and as you scroll down, there's plenty to explore there. Unfortunately, the centre is closed at the moment, but there's still online stuff happening. And there we have the launch. But if we go up here to the tabs at the top, we have the visual arts. And as we scroll down to the bottom, there's the Active Archive Queer in Progress link. So that brings us into the Queer in Progress.timeline online archive. And as we scroll down there, there's a text which introduces the initiative and explains where it came about and what it is we're actually trying to do with the initiative. But we'll be talking to Livia Paldi in a second in a bit more detail about that. So as we get to the bottom of the page, you'll see there is actually a digital timeline laid out in decades. And as we scroll across here, you'll see that there's entry. Hi, I'm not sure quite why that cut off there at the end, but you can go and explore the timeline for yourselves on the projectartcentre.ie website. So I'd like to welcome Livia Paldi, as I said, the outgoing curator of visual arts at Project Art Centre, and really it was Livia who kind of came up with the idea of this initiative. Livia's 4-year term with Project was really excited and was very much embedded in the archives and exploring questions around the archives. Throughout that time, she brought in some really interesting international and Irish artists, a lot of whom were working in various different ways with archives. So Livia's joining us from Hungary, from Budapest, I believe. So hi, Livia.
Yeah, hi everybody. Hi, Hannah. Thanks a lot for the invitation. I actually the outgone curator by now.
Sorry, outgone, yes. Yeah, but we're...
it's good to be back, even if it's just virtual.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant to have you here. So I suppose if we want to kind of start, that maybe you could explain a bit about where the initiative came from and the kind of the overarching project of the Active Archive Slough Institution.
Yeah, I think the Active Archive Slough Institution was an initiative to actually kind of, how would I say, to make myself also familiar with the Institutional History Project, which has a 50+ year history, and as well as to kind of extend a possible scope of activities and create a kind of a shared temporal space as well to invite some research. And somehow Project's history seemed to be a very good starting point or a point of departure to also include other histories, and also kind of create a certain kind of researching community with particular artistic, curatorial, and academic fields, as well as areas of competencies. And I also kind of meant it as to be a longer term process, kind of a work in progress, because I consider working with archives as an ongoing, evolving exchange and over and through materials. But it's also something where you can also look at complex historical events and challenge simplified media representation. You can include a lot of other social, political, gender, and class representation. That's how the Queer in Progress came in as a second chapter. I kind of imagine the whole situation is evolving through different chapters, not necessarily exhibitions. So the first one, The Long Goodbye, which dealt with projects, late 90s histories, when project didn't have a building. That was kind of between spaces, I would say. That was an exhibition. But the Queer in Progress, that was like last March, was meant to be like a 2-week working period, where people were supposed to come together. We were planning different kind of public, semi-public conversations with individuals and with groups, going through, look at, share documents that might not be shared in the larger public, and kind of also talk through different issues and questions around archiving. Let it be ethical issues, practical issues, how to, and also how to create a timeline. So the timeline for me was really proposed as a tool, where you can actually make exchanges around shared histories, but also the differences and how the conflicts and different conflicts of interest, and different kind of questions, worries, fears, desires come about. And also it's a lot about also making personal histories put together with kind of collective memory, and definitely challenging the canon around specific topics. And one of the things is, if people might or might not know, but Project's archive has been donated, or was donated in 2006 to the National Library of Ireland. So that means if you want to do research, then you have to sort of negotiate through another national institution. And I think the whole question about making it a living archive, that was also behind the initiative. So I don't actually think about archives as kind of dumping spaces or something that is a static or unmovable material, but it's that kind of can be exchanged through different kind of sharing and conversations. And the idea was always to look at, also unpack something that were less visible, suppressed, overlooked, or neglected of specific events, and also do it through conversations and so keep it as a continuum in a way.
Yeah, I suppose talking about the kind of overlooked issues, the overlooked kind of histories that you're talking about, it probably is important for viewers who aren't familiar with the initiative to point out that we really were trying to kind of focus on kind of specific kind of identities around kind of lesbian, feminist, female identifying, trans, bi, and kind of HIV and AIDS histories, and really kind of focusing, as Livia said, focusing on the kind of minority histories within the kind of queer canon. So I suppose as well then maybe to talk about the kind of open call idea and what, the kind of some of the materials that we would be inviting people to submit. We discussed the other day, it's kind of quite difficult to write in personal histories. So, because I mean the timeline could be infinite at that stage. So when we initially opened the open call, what was the idea behind that?
I think, as I mentioned, like the second chapter with the Queer in Progress was really meant to be as a dynamic display. So is a kind of an experimental temporal space where probably we were a bit too ambitious in kind of imagining that we can expand specific questions through this kind of collaborative editing process. And then the idea was with the time to put the timeline and the entries online was to also kind of cross-reference certain topics, different kind of histories, whether it's personal or also media histories, like different kind of texts, and to actually offer the reader, or in the case of the display, the viewer, a certain kind of possibility to also read in or edit in their own perspectives. So it's kind of a difficult question about how would you kind of present this. So in that sense, I think the timelines seem to be a good idea to at least to kind of see what kind of resources we have. But it was never meant to be like, how would I say, of course it's going to be fragmented. It's but if in a sense it creates certain kind of dynamics and conversations, and also different kind of arguments, pro and con, I think that's what a timeline is also kind of, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's a tool. It's nothing fixed, it's nothing ticked, but of course what you mentioned as well, it has to be very carefully edited. So there's a lot of different kind of negotiations behind the scenes to be able to put the material online.
Well, we for the display, a lot of the research was done with GCN and through their archives. We also looked a bit at the Irish Queer Archives, but with GCN, we sat down with Lisa Connell at the very beginning. So I might invite Lisa on to join the conversation. And hi, Lisa, how are you doing?
Hey, how's it going?
Hi.
Good. So for anybody who doesn't know, Lisa is the kind of she's worked with GCN since 2008 and has been the managing editor since March 2019. She's a long-time human rights activist and has brought this through her editorial style. So since taking the helm at the magazine, she has kind of expanded the focus of the magazine and featuring kind of social issues, such as looking at kind of the North is Next, the May Day, the May Day event with the Extinction Rebellion, and things like the Black Pride issue. She's also the co-founder of Mother Queer Nightclub, and basically is an all-round amazing person. So that's kind of a synopsis of Lisa. So I suppose, given that we're looking at kind of histories and archives, Lisa, can you tell us a bit about how GCN kind of came about and how it was formed?
Yeah. So firstly, thank you for having us all here this evening, and thank you for arranging this, and congrats to you for all the kind of colossal amount of work that has been done so far on this project. It's really exciting. I mean, I think one thing that I really in general, and it's great to see even on the event tonight, you know, you're going to be talking to Queer Culture Ireland, but the fact that there's so much interest in what we can learn from our past, the stories that were told, the stories that were not told. And, you know, I remember when we sat down initially to talk this out and to tease this out as a trio, I mean, we could have been there all day, really, because there's so many, as Olivia is saying, there's so much, there are so many intersections into how our stories get told, how they get documented, how we get to access them. And so I think we were definitely ambitious. And I think obviously, like with so many other projects, COVID had other ideas. But I suppose the heart of the project is still very pure, in the sense that we really wanted to speak to the complexity of telling stories from a minority perspective. And so GCN is the national LGBTQ plus press in Ireland, and it's been publishing since 1988. And to answer your question, it was evolved through the National LGBT Federation, or the National Gay Federation, as they were called at the time. It was co-founded by Tony Walsh and Catherine Glendon. And Catherine was actually the secretary of NGF at the time that they were planning, and there had been previous iterations. So GCN was the 5th title after many other publications, including Out magazine. And Tony, there's a great piece on GCN's site, which is a reprint from GCN's 100th issue, and it's called That Fucking Rag, amazingly. And basically, it's a really great, if somebody wants a very quick snapshot of the first 100 issues. But basically, Tony explains that at the time, himself and Catherine felt strongly that they wanted a publication that acted as a hybrid. So NGF were doing their newsletters, and then Out magazine had that sort of representation and visible edge of showing queer people to queer people. And so GCN was sort of if you want, a little smorg of those two ideas. And I think that you can really see that in the early editions of the magazine. Yeah. It was newsprint at the time.
And so, I mean, in terms of how it served the community, what were kind of some of the, like, you know, one of the things I looked at, bearing in mind the kind of lesbian aspect, was the lesbian pages that started in '94, and also the Dykes Forum, which I think started in '92, and they were really focusing on kind of expanding voices in terms of, you know, the community being quite segregated at the time, but, you know, between gay and lesbian, but also in terms of, you know, trying to kind of broaden the scope of the magazine's reach. Can you kind of expand a little?
Yeah, totally. I mean, and you know, it was. It's really interesting because obviously GCN across all its time it's always striving to get to that next better place where it's representing and amplifying as many parts of the community as possible. So I think that's a kind of a perennial, that's an ongoing challenge for you to do it the best you can. But the kind of early days of that real estate being clarified, I mean, with the lesbian pages, as you know, Hannah, it's on the timeline, there was very much a clear, you know, they said in the magazine itself, this is not separatist. We just want to, you know, it's about prioritizing and giving space. But actually, we know that, you know, as queer women, we have to fight. We've had to fight for that space historically. We still have to fight for the space. And, you know, I've obviously talked to Tony a lot about this. And, you know, even like the culture that happening at the time in the sense, you know, the gay boys were up in arms at the idea of giving the women one night in the queer space, in the social space, and that's so, you know, it's crazy now to think of that, but that would have been. So I think that the magazine, I always like to think of the magazine as a reflection of what was happening right then. But we also, you know, and we've learned to ask this question in terms of intersectionality, who were not in those pages, you know, at that time. And it's also about being able to, I suppose, not getting too rose tinted either. And I like that Livia and I very much, when we were always talking at the start as well, and with you, Hannah, it's that idea of not, just because something got published, it's not above kind of a cross-examination or a revisit. So I suppose the real estate was given in order to set a standard, but it was an ongoing challenge. And that sort of also, you know, as an editor, I now understand that you know, your editorial process can, of course, if you don't work hard, you can unintentionally just have your own biases kind of more in the content. So it's about really, as a community resource as well, it's important that we don't do that, you know.
Well, I suppose that kind of feeds into, again, what Livia and I were just chatting about there. And I don't know, Livia, if you want to kind of come in with this, but, you know, in terms of the kind of the longevity of an archive, and given GCN's history, that, you know, I mean, Tony talks about it in terms of being the kind of our paper of record, you know, for the queer community in Ireland. And, you know, as you're saying, in terms of the editorial kind of decisions, you know, it then determines what kind of does get written into the archive and how it gets written into the archive. So, yeah, and it also then speaks to kind of the idea of institutionalization. So
I think it's, you know, I think it's super important as well that well, how would I say? So when we chatted, the three of us as well, I think it's good to start from somewhere, and then, like, as you gradually kind of do the research, and obviously project doesn't have the capacity to become like let's say, a research facility. So that's also a kind of a question to organize that, or how that can be organized through different collaborations. And that's why I say that probably at the very beginning it was a bit too ambitious, but I would say that you can also come across a couple of challenges, but the answers to those challenges can be also very exciting, and can also push out a couple of or expose a couple of issues that kind of concerns contemporary cultural scene at the moment, you know, regarding histories or regarding archives. And the other thing is also, like, the idea was to actually gradually open it up, not just to the island itself, like to bring in the Northern Irish histories and beyond, but also beyond. So what could be the kind of the European histories that could be put into conversation as well, you know. And especially I think the 90s was one of the periods that I was super interested in, partly because of my own personal history back in Hungary and Central Eastern Europe, but also because I think that's a decade where a lot of things changed socially, politically, also when it comes to the LGBT community. So it kind of seemed to be a good kind of focus. And of course, but we welcomed, you know, things didn't only happen then, before and after, but I think it was just good to kind of get a grip on a specific decade, and then start kind of expanding through different conversations and also personal histories. And I mean, I remember we had a couple of individual chats as well, and just talking to through things with a couple of people, you just come across a lot of different questions. And there's also the archives of emotions, and like different kind of traumas as well. So it's a lot about also different kind of formats and ways of dealing with.
There's so many questions, and it's a fascinating project in terms of trying to unpack those ideas around the archive. And I mean, as you said, Lisa, we could have had this conversation for a day or two, and we could still have this conversation. I'd love to. And I will be talking to some of the other guests about the archives and what their material bring to it. But just before we kind of move on, because I'm kind of conscious of time, Lisa, I just want to very quickly kind of talk to you as well about why we decided to team up with GCN for this particular launch, and what the actual In and Out initiative is, and how GCN is doing during lockdown and during the pandemic. So
so we were delighted to collaborate with you in this manner. In and Out is a digital festival of LGBTQ plus creativity, and we developed it in lockdown and in the at the start of the pandemic, because we understood for only the second time in the magazine's history, we had to pause the print publication. And really quickly, myself and the team kind of wanted to say, okay, what is GCN's job in this time? And we kind of really quickly came to the idea that we wanted to educate, entertain, and inform the community. And digital eventing became, I suppose, the only way that we were all connecting for a while, and still maybe for another while. And so, yeah, it was our way to try to feel really still connected to the community and show, because that's the thing that on a very basic level, the thing I love about GCN and the thing I love about queer media is that it's showing queers to queers, you know? So, and there's still such power in that, because as we know, the global context for LGBTQ plus rights is far from sorted, and there's still so many problems and so much danger, and so the privilege of being, you know, relatively safe, relatively able to say and do what you want is can't be kind of overestimated. So yeah, we've been delighted to program events like this and just try to have a bit of fun along the way.
Yeah. I think one of the other things to point out, and I should mention this, you'll see along the bottom of the screen, there's a text number there to support GCN, and being out of print, one of the kind of funding revenue sources has gone with the advertising. So I think you guys are really, you know, it'd be great to support you guys in that way. So we would suggest that people text if they can, or go on to GCN's website, and there's other ways of supporting you guys. Well, I'm going to say thank you very much to both of you, and I'm going to bring on our next guests, who are Sonia Mulligan and Ger Moan, who were the filmmakers of Attitude film. So before we bring them on, we're going to have a quick look at the trailer for Attitude.
I think we forgive in order to survive, because I think if we held on to every moment of unfairness or rejection, we'd go mental.
Hello, Global Lesbian Line, can I help you?
I wished I was, no, this is right, 50 years ago, well, 51 years ago, 51 and a half years ago. Anyway, yeah, I remember thinking really clearly that I wished I was a man because I could marry women. Now this is right the age of 7 there.
I mean, I wrote about my autobiography. The word lesbian rang out like a rifle shot.
Using that bedroom language of a Sunday. And I realised that being lesbian for her was bedroom language.
You know, it's very hard to tell a woman who's singing in your face with power and delivering with great stage presence, I can't like you because you're gay.
I live in a time where it's so accepted.
I went to see Angela Davis recently, and one of the things she said was about dreaming and how important it is to dream. She said, because future generations will be living your dreams. And I thought that was lovely, but I also thought, you know what, I'm living my own dream.
She's a wild child, she breaks all the rules.
Hi, Jared and Sonia. Thanks for joining us tonight. I absolutely loved Attitude. It's such a fantastic film, and as you know, as a piece of archival material, it's such a valuable piece. So congratulations, and you know, it's an award-winning documentary really at this stage, and it's traveled the world, which is great. But do you want to maybe kind of give us a bit of an insight into kind of what prompted you to actually make the documentary?
Yeah, absolutely. Can I just say first, congratulations for the launch of the timeline, and thank Hannah and Livia and Lisa for essentially holding the queer space for us, you know, and many other people as well, but just for holding that space while we're all in our own little boxes through the pandemic. Yeah, so Altitude was kind of a labour of love for both of us, and we were coming out of Gaze, the Gay and Lesbian Film Festival in Dublin one year, and thought, you know, where's our stories? You know, we're not seeing our lives on the screen, and thought, well, someone should do that. And then we kind of looked at each other and said, well, we're somebody, like, you know, get up and do us, you know. So that kind of was how it began, and we just started a Kickstarter. And then the main kind of points we had, we wanted it to be, we're based in Dublin, but we wanted the film to be an all-island approach, you know, so that it wouldn't be only Dublin, or it wouldn't be just the Republic of Ireland, it would be the entire island. So that was really important, to cover that, and then to try and get a mixture of not only lesbians from different places, but also activists and lived experience, which is just as important and is part of our story of the community and how we've got to the point we're at today.
And sort of shift a little bit from a campaign focus to a more grassroots building community kind of focus.
Yeah. Well, I think in terms of, you know, it does tie in very closely what we're trying to do with the Queer in Progress timeline, in terms of kind of expanding the focus beyond the kind of traditional and, you know, the traditional male narratives, which are in themselves very important. And it's not about trying to rewrite history and take them out, but it's about trying to expand our histories and say, look, we were all here as well. So I think, you know, I think that was fantastic. And also, as you say, to bring in the kind of more, the less urban centric voices, you know, and expand it throughout the country.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of important as well, the richness, like you say, there is lots of experience that have been captured in the gay community, and say on topics, difficult topics such as homophobic bullying or attacks. You know, we would have, certainly I would have in the 80s and 90s thought, oh, gay bashing, it's gay men being beaten up. But what we learned very quickly in the interviews for Altitude is that lesbian and gay women of all identities had the same experiences and suffered physical attacks. So that was, we felt, one of the really strong things to kind of bring to the fore as well. So it's like it's expanding on what has been there before.
Well, you've also said, you know, with the interviews that what was kind of compacted down to make the film is only kind of a minute part of what you were actually doing. So what's happening with, you know, have you any plans to go forward with that material? Or
yeah, I'll just talk a little bit and then I'll let you have some voice. It's just so exciting. I always just start chatting away. But yeah, we realized very quickly it's so vast, the amount of information and the amount of stories. And we used probably a 20th of the interview footage that we got. Now, we used everybody we interviewed was included, but we couldn't fit the full interviews in. So there's lots of really valuable information. So at the moment, we are very lucky that Orla McGill, a member of our own community, has offered to create the website for us. And she is currently beavering away at home on that. And hopefully that will be launched in the next week or two, which is really exciting. And that is going to have a lot more information on us that we could even fit into the documentary, which I think Ger will talk about.
Well, I'm just picking up, and again, thanks to yourself, Lisa and Livia, for that great conversation, because the archive, the idea of minority stories and marginalized stories is just so vital, but also it's so huge, and that's what we learned from doing Attitude as well. It expands as you work on it. So the film itself, which is a feature length, has a lot of, as you say, art material. Obviously, the interviewee content, but also lots of pamphlets and posters and venues and locations, and there's a lot of background in there as well for the community. And in forming the website, then we're hoping to have more resources, you know, a background to the film, a couple of historical articles, links to community resources, obviously your archive, and it's fascinating what you're doing with that open concept.
Well, it's great because already, Ger, you know, you've contributed a couple of pieces which are either up or going up, and I know that you guys have been activists.
It's really fun, actually.
Yeah, I know that you guys have been activists in the community for I won't name how many.
Say how many decades.
No, you've both featured in the archive in various different guises. But just is the film available to watch online or to access?
Yeah, so currently it's available on, I don't know if a lot of people know, but it's Lesflix, LESFLICKS, and it's actually a lesbian streaming platform. So all the content is lesbian. So they've a load of short films and feature films. So that's a service you just subscribe to, like Netflix, but for lesbians and other women. And so that's currently, in the next 2 weeks, we have sent our DVDs off to be printed and duplicated.
Oh, brilliant.
So we're going to be bringing old school copies of the DVD will be available to purchase, and that's to fund kind of the website and stuff going forward.
Brilliant.
And we're going to make it available to stream for view locally as well. So to pay.
Excellent. We look forward to that. Guys, I'm afraid I'm going to have to move on. Thank you so much for being here. And if anybody wants to watch the trailer, it is up on the Queer in Progress timeline. And we really look forward to the website and a new archive of material. It's going to be really exciting. So our next guest is actor, director, and adoption rights campaigner Noelle Brown. And Noelle was actually featured in a play in Project Art Centre in 1996 called it was a play by Emma Donoghue called Ladies and Gentlemen, and the play was based on the real life story of vaudeville performer Annie Hindle, and Noelle actually played the original role of Annie. So we have a clip, an audio clip that was recorded as part of the Foul, Filthy, Stinking Muck Symposium in Project Art Centre in June 2019. And we were delighted to have Noelle reading her original role, and alongside her we had Nicola Kavanagh reading the role of Anne Ryan, her soon-to-be girlfriend they actually ended up marrying. And the clip that you're about to hear was directed by This Is Pop Baby's Philip McMahon. And in the clip, you're going to hear Annie Hindle and Anne Ryan discussing how they'll persuade the minister to marry them. So if we can listen to the clip, and then we'll be talking to Noelle in a second.
Let me get this clear. I've spent the best years of my life trying to find the courage to kiss you, and now you're proposing marriage?
Wouldn't you want to, then?
Of course I want to. Like pigs probably love to fly.
Well, I've been giving the matter a lot of thought.
Yeah?
What's to stop us from getting married for real?
Well, the law, for starters.
Where does it say it?
I don't know where exactly, but it must to. Well, try convincing a minister it doesn't.
Now, if you kept your suit on and told him your name was, say, Charles Hindle.
Told who?
The minister.
That must be the most outrageous, damn fool plan I've ever heard in my life.
But it's the only sensible thing to do.
You wouldn't have it in you.
Look it, if I could brave the Atlantic Ocean, I must have nerve enough for this.
I bet you would. You extraordinary creature. Or we could just skip the ceremony and head straight for the honeymoon.
We deserve better than that.
Noelle, how are you?
Hannah, mighty congratulations on tonight.
Oh, thanks very much.
Welcome.
I absolutely first of all, apologies for the sound, the volume on the recording. It was a stage recording, so the mics were set quite low. But I absolutely love listening to that, and I'm really sorry that I didn't get to see the original play, because it just it was the second of two plays that were put on by Emma Donoghue, and they were both really powerful works. But what was it like to actually perform in that in 1996? It was only 3 years after decriminalization.
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, it was such a super script and fantastic story, true story. Everything was 14 songs in it as well. And it was an amazing opportunity to do it. And I loved that Emma was leading the charge around, plays about lesbian stories, lesbian characters. She did I Know My Own Heart in '93, because when I was an actor, in the '80s, those plays weren't out there, those stories weren't out there. And as a lesbian and as an actor, you really wanted to see those stories. The only one that I have a memory of, there was a play that went on, I think it was in the mid '80s, late '80s maybe, in Lombard Street Studios, and my straight friend said, "Don't go and see it, it's the most depressing play ever." And it was about lesbians, so everybody was going, "Oh my God, this play about lesbians." And it was called The Bitter Tears of Petra von Kant. So even the title alone, that's all there was. There was nothing out there. So Emma just, launching herself there in '93 was just fantastic, and such a great writer. And it was badly needed. The men's stories were out there, but ours weren't. We were still, very, very far behind.
Well, I think unfortunately that's kind of still the case in a lot of the time. And I know this is something that came up in the symposium, but also one of the things that we spoke about in the symposium was around your concerns about actually choosing to accept the role in terms of your sexuality and identifying your
Yeah, it was a big concern. I mean, the theatre industry was 99.9% men who handed out the jobs, straight men. There was a lot of sexual politics. There were casting couches, though everyone says there wasn't. So being identified as lesbian was not a good career move, really. And I'd had two very senior directors sit me down once and tell me, don't drink pints, because it's quite butch and, could kind of give a hint of lesbianism. And the other one was, well, if you're thinking about being a lesbian, don't, because it'll be career suicide. So when I was offered the part, I had that in the back of my mind. But then I went, well, what kind of an actor do I want to be? Just only play straight roles so nobody will ever know I'm a lesbian. But I decided, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do the play. And it was such a great thing that they cast a lesbian in the part as well, which was fantastic. And it was something that spoke to me, and it's a beautiful love story. There is a tragic story in it, but there's also a lot of fun and a lot of laughs. So it was a fantastic time, and I loved doing the play, and I never regretted taking it. And if it had an effect on my career, I don't know, and I don't really care, to be quite honest.
Exactly.
Certainly at 55, I don't care about anything anymore, so it's fine.
Well, it's still something that comes up, and it also comes up in terms of Hollywood in casting. And particularly nowadays in casting trans people in the role of trans characters, and there's been a lot of controversy over that. But I just want to kind of jump forward as well, because one of the things that we wanted to do tonight in terms of kind of giving voice and giving voice to minorities is actually to talk about your work with the adoption rights campaign, and particularly at the moment, with the Mother and Baby Home report. So
absolutely. And I've been thinking about this over the last few days, just celebrating this fantastic archive that's happening here tonight in the launch. And I thought everybody's heard of the Commission of Investigation report, which brought a lot of hurt and devastation to survivors of mother and baby institutions. And I was kind of thinking, it's as if this archive wasn't created, by the people that have created it and didn't have the input of the queer community. But if they gave it instead to 3 people and gave them 21 million and said, you create an archive, a report around the queer community, gather a lot of testimonies, take these stories and present a report. And then if that report turned out with a summary on it saying there was no evidence of discrimination, no evidence of inequality, no evidence of homophobia, that's what was reflected back to a community, how damaging that would be. And that's precisely what happened to people who came out of mother and baby homes or gave birth in mother and baby homes. The summary said there was no forced incarceration, no forced adoptions, no injuries to children because of vaccine trials, all of that kind of thing. So I think the importance of an archive, we're on here tonight to celebrate that, the voices of the community, the history of a community. And that Commission investigation report is a disgrace, and the government needs to come out and say that. It is not fit for purpose. And it is an archival document that could go down through the years as a piece of 76 years of history. So the value of archive, even here tonight, to reflect people's stories and difficult aspects in our history to have that not, you know, presented in a decent way when they had one job and 21 million to do it is desperately sad. So we're at a very crucial time in this country around that history that we have been attempting to hide, obliterate really for so long.
Yeah.
So it's time we really, really dealt with it, you know.
Well, one of the fantastic things that's happened recently, and that came out of the theatre, and in saying that, you know, they haven't given necessarily lesbian voices or trans voices much credit. The Abbey Theatre there on St. Patrick's Day produced Home Part 1, which I know you were really involved in. So do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. I mean, that was a direct response to the you know, the devastation caused by the Commission report. Essentially, Graham and Neil and the Abbey they've always kept up with this issue. So they rang and said, we want to do something. We have an idea. We feel, you know, survivors' voices have been lost because their testimonies have been changed, altered, taken out of context in the report. So this was a direct response. And it was an incredible night. I mean, I didn't know how it would be received, but survivors were very grateful that their voices were heard, you know, in our national theatre. And it did some help in some way to heal and to give people back their stories and their voices and their histories through their own personal testimonies. So it was a crucial night, it really was. And to have it happen on St. Patrick's Day as well, I think was very, very significant. So I'm very pleased that it happens, but we still have a long way to go. So absolutely. I urge people, the queer community as well, who understand inequality and being part of a minority and being denied rights, identity rights, whatever aspects of your life, that they continue to support us. The public are the group, you know, we're starting to have a movement like marriage equality. We have the support of the public who broke the Dáil server during the Repeal the Seal campaign and forced the government to do a U-turn. And the same with, you know, the Commission report, where the transcripts were, you know, we don't know where they went, the tapes were missing. But again, public support made sure that those tapes were found. So that's the power of you know, having the nation behind us, you know. But it's time we dealt with that history and root out the level of Catholicism that is still controlling us here.
And is there anything you would kind of urge people to do? Are there any petitions or kind of letters to government?
Currently, no, but it's an ongoing issue. It's an ongoing campaign. So I'd ask that you keep an eye on. I can put the links up on the Adoption Rights Alliance page and the Clan Project. There, a lot of the campaigns would go through there, and some would go through my website as well, noellebrown.com. But we, at the moment, we won't stop campaigning. There will be more petitions. There will be plenty more emails. So stay with us because we really need the support.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, Noelle, I'd love to kind of talk about this a bit more, but unfortunately we're going to have to quickly move on. But thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Thank you.
Thanks for the contribution. So yeah, our next guests, we're actually, we'll just flash to a slide and I'll introduce my next guests when they pop up. Thanks. Hi. So part of the reason I wanted to introduce you when you popped on the screen is because I nearly broke GCN's platform because I invited too many people on. So I have to apologize to the viewers, first of all, that we're moving so swiftly through everything. And really, I'd love to be giving everybody more voices, but there's so much to do. And my next three guests here are Judith Finlay, Patrick McDonough and Kate Renan. Judith and Kate are two of the co-founders of Queer Culture Ireland, or QCI for short. And Patrick is a member of QCI, but also was the curator of the Quilt Echoes and Memories exhibition, which was organised by QCI. So we have a clip from the Names Project founder, Mary Shannon. We were delighted during the display in the project gallery last year of the Queer and Project Timeline. We were delighted to have one of the memorial quilts on display. And we also very kindly, through Judith, were allowed to show a video of Mary. So Judith, do you want to maybe tell us a bit about the Names Project? And
Sure. Well, first of all, like everyone else, I just want to echo the congratulations to yourself and Livia. This is absolutely amazing. And to create this archival queer space is, as you know, very close to our hearts in QCI. So yeah, we're very proud.
We'll talk about that with Kate in a bit, but
yeah, no problem. Yeah. But in terms of the Names Project, so essentially it started around 1989, 1990. A woman called Mary Shannon, who you're going to show in a little bit, talking. Mary was one of the co-founders of the Names Project, and she had a great friend called Joe Carthy. And Joe contracted AIDS around the late 80s, and to his absolute praise, he took it upon himself to educate his friends and to teach them about AIDS and what it meant and how it would affect him, and the kind of the safe sex side of it and how people could counter that. So he taught his friends Mary being one of them, and then they, fully supported him and were absolutely fantastic to him, took care of him when he was in his later days. But then one of the things that Joe did was a friend of his had gone to San Francisco. He got a book on the Names Project in the States. And this was a memorial, an AIDS memorial quilt that was prepared by people who were either friends or family or loved ones of people that were lost to AIDS. So that started in the States. It started very much as a political matter as much as a memorial. And then when Joe's friend came back with the book, he showed it to Mary and said, this is what I would like you to do when I die. I'd like to be remembered in this way. So that was the first panel created for Joe. And it grew from there. They had their base in the Dublin AIDS Collective, and several people would meet every week and make these panels. And as the AIDS crisis in Ireland got worse and worse, more and more people would gather to remember their loved ones, to make sure that there was visibility around AIDS and HIV in Ireland. And we have ended up with a fantastic and very beautiful and very poignant memorial of that time. There's as far as we know, there's about 16 quilts. We have 12 on display in film base. So.
Well, we might just very quickly actually watch a clip of Mary talking about some of the panels on the quilts.
This one here, Michael's, that he designed that himself. And two friends of his, they were English, they used to come over every so often. These were making it for him. And they used to come over every so often and he'd tell them what he wanted on it. The dolphins, the two dolphins down there, again, they signify freedom. He's free from all pain now. He used to love going for walks in the forest. So hence the tree there. Loved having a game of cards on a Saturday night. And the rain, when he'd go, wherever it was they used to walk in England, that's exactly what it looked like. There was mountains and the whole lot in the background. But when he died, they finished it off. And that travelled back and forth to England, got over the couple of years, back and forth every so often over, and then they eventually came over, and at our memorial service then they handed it over to us in the quilt. That one there was for the lighthouse a chap went into the lighthouse to visit someone. I met this chap, Ricky, and he had nobody, and he visited him for a while and then went in one day and Ricky was dead, so that's how he made that one. There's a lot of them that people would come in and ask us to make a panel for their family, but wouldn't give us any information. So you kind of had to use your own imagination and everything else on what to do and what to put on it, that kind of way. Christine, her daughter just came in to us and asked us would we make one. Her mum had died, but it gave us no information, only her mum's name was Christine. So we had to just, she just wanted her mum remembered. Because they're a beautiful way of remembering somebody. It's there and their story and the whole lot is there. But we used to do a memorial service every year around Irish AIDS Day and that.
It's just so lovely to see Mary again, and we were really, really sad when unfortunately Mary passed away in June last year. And I mean, she's such a loss to not only to the queer community, but to actually tying the queer community to the rest of the rest of the community who suffer from AIDS and it's around HIV. It's very important to recognize that, although initially it was known as the kind of gay disease, that it was, that there were also, hemophiliacs and intravenous drug users and a number of other, people who were affected by it. But maybe, Judith, in terms of Mary and how you kind of came to hold the quilts and...
Yeah, well, I'll have to say hands up to Edmund Lynch for this, because Edmund originally introduced myself and Mary, and I had been working with Edmund in the National Museum. We were setting up an exhibition, and part of that included the interviews that he had done, a fantastic archive as well of over 200 people who were interviewed. One of the people he brought on board then was Mary, and he wanted to talk to her and maybe interview her, which he did afterwards. But as soon as he introduced myself and Mary, we just hit it off. Mary is just one of those people who is instantly likable, so warm and affectionate, and everyone who met her, you just instantly loved her. She's the wonderful queer mammy, I think. She just took everyone under her wing. Yeah, and so we started talking about the quilts and about the idea that because, there was very effective treatment now, the idea of the quilts had gone out of popular memory. People weren't that aware of them, and they used to bring them to schools, they used to take them on tours, but that kind of educational side of it wasn't such a feature. And we were kind of saying that is sad, because obviously AIDS is still a disease that can be damaging. So it's still a piece of education that needed to be spread, but also it's a piece of history that was so iconic. It's such a huge symbol of this time. So we started talking about how we could preserve the quilts. Mary had them in her house. She did amazing work taking care of them all her life. But she started talking to me then about how we could take care of them in the more long term and maybe get them out on display again. So they were sitting with me. I was minding them at that time because her house was full of all these quilts, and so she was happy to give them over and let someone else look after them for a while. And then tragically, she did die while I had them in my care. So her husband immediately came to me and said that if I would mind taking care of them, and I ended up as the custodian as a result of that. But also then we said the first thing we want to do is put them on display, because she had always wanted that. We wanted to get them back on display again. So that was in memory of her more than anything.
Yeah. Well, then I suppose talking to the display, Patrick, you were the curator of the fantastic exhibition, which is on display throughout April. And do you want to maybe tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, I mean, really, a big part of this is due to Judith and Kate. I mean, Judith and I would have been talking about in the last summer, and it kind of dawned on us that there were two very important anniversaries coming up. There was the 35th anniversary of the foundation of Gay Health Action, and the 30th anniversary of the first quilt, or the first panel of the Irish Names quilt, which was Joe Carty. And I suppose the quilts are so visually impressive. But we also thought it was important as well to highlight the important work of Gay Health Action along with the quilts, because really, I suppose when I was doing the research, I came to realize that the Gay Health Action was certainly one of the most important organisations set up in the 1980s in Ireland. And I certainly don't think it's received the recognition it deserves in Irish historiography. And a lot more people should know about the work of Gay Health Action, because we've said this several times. I think without them, there would have been many more who'd have died, unfortunately, because of the ignorance and lack of information around how people could have protected themselves at that time, because you had a government who was completely inept in terms of providing the explicit information that needed to get out there. And had it not been for Gay Health Action, you wouldn't have had that information.
Yeah. I think it's also important as well in that context, and I do agree with you in terms of Gay Health Action, but I think it's also important, once again, to go back to looking, to acknowledge GCN's role in terms of, progressing kind of information on a kind of a national platform in terms of sexual health, but also really in supporting women's sexual health. And obviously lesbians are in the minority of people affected by HIV and AIDS. But also I know that there was kind of lesbian groups in Cork and other parts of the country who were also trying to disseminate that work. But the exhibition, the quilt exhibition, is fantastic, and it's it's great to see the quilts on display again, and there is a lot of that information visible from the Gay Health Action archives. And the quilt, I should say, is on display in Film Base in Temple Bar in Dublin. And hopefully now from next week, anybody who's within the county or within 20 kilometres of Dublin can actually get into town and see it. And it is visible from the windows, so it's all COVID safe. And it is down to, apart from Patrick's curation, it is really down to Queer Culture Ireland and to you two. So, Kate, do you very quickly, I know we're running out of time, but you very quickly want to explain to us what Queer Culture Ireland is and what your kind of hopes and plans are for it?
Yeah, absolutely. So it sort of started as a research network. A couple of years ago, Judith and myself and a few others were all doing all this independent, excellent research into various different parts of queer history, and realized that a lot of the resources come from conversations like this and like conversations we've had with Queer Culture Ireland. And we wanted to form...
I think we've just lost Kate there for a sec. So Judith, maybe do you want to pick up?
Yeah, so as she said, it's a research network. It started off as, it was just really to bring together anyone doing the research, but also to support people, because there's some people like myself. I'm in a steady job in the National Museum, and I can potentially offer support to people doing independent research or people starting off in their career if they're interested in this. Sorry, Kate, you're back.
Welcome back.
Sorry. Bad connection. Apologies. Judith, you carry on. Keep going.
That's okay. So basically, we started off with that idea of just let's bring everyone together, give people a forum where we can bounce ideas off each other, and maybe start collaborations that we hadn't expected to come together. And yourself, putting everyone's heads together ends up with far bigger, greater ideas come out of that. So it started off that way, and then it snowballed quite quickly. Really, COVID in one way was a bit of a catalyst in that we had online meetings. It meant that more people from across the country and from other countries could join in the discussion. And then also the sad event of Mary dying meant that we had the quilts, and we also had quite a lot of support from Dublin Pride, who before COVID we had planned to do some physical talks with them that would coincide with all of the regional prides. So because of all of these little pieces that had come together, we decided that the first proper event that we would do would be the exhibition. But so that was kind of one of the major projects, but a lot of the other projects that we have in the background are possibly a little less kind of dramatic than doing an exhibition. But there's things like trying to, queer catalogues in museums and galleries and spaces like that, and try to bring the language in and merge histories into standard histories that are being told that just don't give space to any sort of queer histories. So there's a lot of work around that. There's a lot of people doing amazing research. And people in Epic Museum doing an exhibition on diasporas, people like Patrick writing these really vital books, and Paura Kerrigan writing these really important pieces that are coming together from the research from things like the IQA and archives like your own. So we're just trying to give people that space where we can all really support each other. And what's happening is it's creating this thing that's far bigger than the sum of its parts. And a lot of great ideas for what might be potential good futures are coming from it. So, we've talked about,
I think it's great that Queer Culture Ireland are really kind of linking these networks and these archives together. And I think that's going to be really important to kind of stand to the community in the future. But I'm afraid I'm going to have to move on. We've already gone over by about 5 minutes, so I knew taking on this interview was going to be a lot. But I'm delighted, and I really, really look forward to what Queer Culture Ireland do in the future. And well done on the exhibition.
Thank you so much, and well done to you on tonight, and for the launch, and for all your work. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Really.
Thank you. All right. Well, we're going to actually keep up on the HIV and AIDS topic, and we're going to talk to two of ACT UP Dublin's members in a second. Hi, Noel and
Hello,
Noah.
hello.
And I good, thanks. And first of all, happy Trans Day of Visibility, Noah. And
thank you very much.
Yeah, not at all. We're delighted to have you here to be able to kind of recognize the day that it is and the visibility. And I know you've had a really tough day, and you've been kind of out representing the trans community to a huge extent.
I would say Trans Day of Visibility is probably the busiest day on the trans calendar, but
Absolutely.
we're happy to do it, and that's the whole point of it.
Yeah. Well, so first of all, before we discuss kind of trans healthcare issues, I want to talk to Noel, and Noel is, among other things, a filmmaker and photographer, but also a kind of a fly-by-night historian, really. Noel's going to give us a potted history of ACT UP and ACT UP Dublin, and I'm just going to let him pretty much talk.
Okay, yeah. I'll make it so that it'll eventually lead to where we need to get to for Noah. But just to give a history of ACT UP, its origins initially, and then get on to ACT UP Dublin. But essentially, Larry Kramer, the American playwright who wrote The Normal Heart, which gave a speech at the Lesbian and Gay Community Services Center in New York in March 1987. And he posed a question during that speech, which is, do we want to start an organization devoted to political action? The answer was a resounding yes, and about 300 people then turned up for what became the first ACT UP meeting 2 days later, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, as it was known. So things took off pretty quickly. By the end of March, 250 ACT UP members had their first demonstration at Wall Street, demanding greater access to experimental HIV drugs and to sort of get a coordinated national policy in the United States, which didn't exist through the Reagan administration, to fight AIDS, essentially. 17 activists were arrested, which was a very common thing for ACT UP for many years. It doesn't happen too much anymore, but occasionally it does. And part of that activism, as well as we've spoken about, is the artivism, is the art end of things. It's not only all, as protest and the silence equals death image, which I think most people would know with the pink triangle, actually came out of a project which was formed the year before. And that was actually inspired in part by the Guerrilla Girls in New York. I don't know if you have heard of them. Yeah, they were the anonymous group of feminist artists. And they used kind of wheat pasting techniques and whatnot in New York. So silence equals death sort of came on from that sort of background, and then became enveloped into ACT UP. They all became ACT UP members, essentially. And then ACT UP has set up its sort of art wing, Grand Fury. There's sort of well-known names there: Evelyn Finkelstein, Amy Hurd, Marlene McCarthy, and then a lot of other. Somewhere there.
That one there.
Yeah, that one there. And actually, Keith Haring, of course, as well, a very important member of ACT UP, and David Wojnarowicz as well, who's quite a very famous activist, artist, filmmaker. Incidentally, an Irish connection there. U2 used his image of the buffaloes that he had treated for the single one, and then inspired the video and whatnot. But the other important person who sort of gets left out and forgotten in Ireland really is the Irish artist Billy Quinn, who studied at NCAD. Billy moved to London, then he moved to New York, and he became an early ACT UP member and associate, pretty much from the beginning. And he did a lot of paintings, collage paintings, the AIDS works as they were known, the Saint series, Cremation series. And I think Emma did a retrospective there years ago. They did a retrospective on Billy. I think he lives in the Netherlands now. So there's a lot of Irish connections going right back to the very, very early days.
One of the other things that I'm quite interested in, again, and I'm sure many of the people watching tonight got to watch Russell T Davies' It's a Sin, which was a fantastic, really valuable kind of depiction of what it was like during the kind of the height of the AIDS pandemic in the 80s. But one of the things one of the criticisms of that was the representation of the kind of lesbian community and women generally who were supporting men who were dying from AIDS.
Absolutely, yeah, and absolutely integral and very sort of practical stuff, like, you know, visiting people and arranging things when families, you know, abandon them and so on and so forth. And in fact, it's very important to note that there was a lot of women and lesbian members of ACT UP right from the beginning. Alexis Danzig, she was a very interesting character. She said ACT UP was the first cross-gender lesbian gay group she'd been involved with. That's the way she described it. Jerry Wells, who I know, Jerry's great. She was a member. She was at the die-in at St. Patrick's, which is a famous action. And again, another Irish link. Her daughter is an ACT UP Dublin member. She's studying in Trinity. So she turned up one day and I went, I know that surname. She said, I'm Jerry's daughter. So, and then also there was a lesbian feminist art activist collective. I don't know if you ever know them as well, Fierce Pussy. In 91, and they were set up in New York, and they concentrated on sort of age-related art and lesbian-identified art. And a lot of those members were there from very early on.
And in terms of the Dublin branch or chapter, how did that come about?
Well, that came on really from ACT UP sort of started to grow within the United States, you know, Boston, Los Angeles. I have to mention Connie Norman. She was a trans woman, and she became the sort of unofficial spokesperson for ACT UP LA. There's a film has just come out about her, AIDS Diva. So then chapter starts springing up around the world, ACT UP Paris, ACT UP London, Manchester, and then Dublin ACT UP, as it was called, was formed in 1990 by Izzy Kamikaze, Owen Freeney, Barry Quirk, and then Tom McGinty was involved as well, the Diceman. There's a very famous shot that I know you know of Tom dressed as a condom crossing Halfpenny Bridge. There was actions at Pro Cathedral. So like they were full on for about 2 years. They had an action every month. And then eventually it sort of died out because Izzy and the Dublin ACT UP members went on to reboot Dublin Pride, which had stopped essentially. And that's where their focus shifted to.
So the current iteration of ACT UP Dublin, I know, kind of came about in about 2016.
2016, that came out of sort of a response to the increase in HIV diagnosis since about 2008, 2009. Sexual health budgets have been cut, HIV numbers started going up, and then Tom Strong and Andrew Leavitt really sort of thought, well, maybe it's time to have another ACT UP Dublin chapter. Eric O'Brien came in early, Robbie Lawler, and then Will St. Ledger joined, and then me, and then various others, and Noah, and it sort of grew from that. That was when it came from.
Yeah, I know you've had an awful lot of kind of activist work since then, but one of your most recent works, I suppose, was it was a collaboration again with GCN, the call to reopen the Gay Men's Health Service, the GMHS. So I might just bring Noah in on this.
Noah for that, absolutely.
Yeah. So Noah, can you give us a bit of insight into what the Gay Men's Health Service is or was? Yeah, sorry, I should say was. And why it was
half.
Yeah.
I mean, the Gay Men's Health Service was, kind of is. The only dedicated service for gay and bisexual men, other men of sex with men, the trans community in terms of sexual health. It's like it is our only specifically culturally competent service that deals with sexual health in terms of gay and bisexual men, other men of sex with men, and the trans community. So as you can imagine, the fact that this clinic has not essentially reopened for over a year now can be detrimental to the sexual health of many of those groups of people. Well,
absolutely. I mean, and one of the things that really struck me during your talk the other week was, for somebody who would generally be fairly cognizant of trans healthcare issues and trans rights in general. I mean, one of the things that really struck out with me was the significance of the Gay Men's Health Service in terms of trans people accessing sexual health care. So can you maybe talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, so I mean, it doesn't just stem exactly from trans healthcare, but what a lot of people have to understand is that, the trans community in Ireland are treated horrifically when it comes to healthcare, and that's not just sexual health, that's any form of healthcare, that's trans-specific healthcare, that's healthcare in all kind of sections across the entire healthcare spectrum. And what ends up happening then is when trans people's healthcare is, number one, not understood, when trans identities aren't understood, when our bodies aren't understood, how we have sex is not understood by healthcare professionals, that often means that, you know, we're put in this position that we have to become our own doctors. It means that we're essentially then treated less favorably when it comes to healthcare. And what ends up happening then is that we automatically, I'm not saying every single one of us, but you know, a lot of the trans community will automatically have our backs up when it comes to any sort of healthcare situation, because we find that not many health professionals are culturally competent. And I'm going to keep using that term, culturally competent, because it is so important. It is so important for healthcare professionals to understand the different types of bodies that we have, you know, the different issues that might face us healthcare wise that might not necessarily, that cis people might not necessarily face. And then, you know, when it comes to sexual health, that's even more intimate, and a lot of trans people will find it uncomfortable to talk about their sex life. A lot of trans people will find it uncomfortable to talk about their genitals. So to have a service that was completely culturally competent, a service that completely understood, you know, different scenarios when it comes to trans people, that didn't make assumptions about our bodies, didn't make assumptions about our sexualities, didn't make assumptions about how we have sex, was so important. And it's not just for the comfortability of the trans person who is sitting in that chair opposite that healthcare professional, but it also their knowledge of our bodies and how we have sex, and the things that we need to do in terms of protecting ourselves from HIV, etc. That there needs to be a medical knowledge there too. So when it comes to, you know, medications such as PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, in terms that, which for those who don't know is a HIV preventative drug, you know, if a cis man appears in front of that healthcare professional seeking PrEP, the dosing regimen for that man might be different to the dosing regimen for me, who is a gay man, but I'm a trans man. So it depends on which way we have sex. And it's having a clinic that is culturally competent and knowledgeable about that. Like, for example, the PrEP absorption rate in different bodily tissues has a different so like the absorption rate for PrEP in vaginal tissue is longer than that in rectal tissue, and our doctors need to know that in order to prescribe that medication to us in a competent way that will protect us. So in terms of the Gay Men Health Service, I found that they were extremely competent in that area. And it doesn't just go to that, it goes to language. It goes to, you know, understanding what might make some trans people uncomfortable in terms of language. You know, you can change your language to, instead of saying vaginal, saying frontal, saying, you know, things like that, not making assumptions. And, you know, that's something that the trans community have really lost out on this past year, is a culturally competent service that we feel safe in the hands of, a service that we don't have to have our backs up when we go in there, because we know that those people are educated and knowledgeable in trans identities. And trusting your healthcare professional is such an important thing. And that's not just for trans people, that's for any person. That, you know, to be able to trust your healthcare provider is so important. And unfortunately, trans people have been put in a situation where we don't necessarily always trust our healthcare providers. But I found, as an attendee of that clinic, I 100% trusted my healthcare providers in that clinic.
Okay, well, we'll be putting up links in about how to support and try and action reopening the Gay Men's Health Service. And I think next year I propose to GCN that we host a whole segment on just trans kind of visibility and trans you know, trans healthcare in general. But Noah, thank you very much. It's been really informative, and Noel, thank you as well. So we are now going to talk to our next guest, who is filmmaker Cara Holmes, and we have her documentary, The Future of Feminism, on the timeline. So before we talk to Cara, I might just, we'll have a quick look at the clip from The Future of Feminism.
I work in Guatemala. We work with a lot of women that are really oppressed, beaten, all that kind of stuff. So, like Mum, I think it has to have a balance. You know, working over there, over here, it's exactly like it's completely the other way. So, exactly the same. I think it has to have a balance. You know, feminism. Yeah.
Well, I don't really have anything like against women. You know, I think women are just as equal as men. So, I don't really think there's anything more to say really than that they're equal.
If you look at the government that just came in, like I didn't really follow, I was too young to vote as well, but like I mean, there was well less women taking seats in it than there was males.
Well, to me it's a positive thing, but I don't know about everyone else, but I'd like to think that, like, you know, if you tell someone you're a feminist, they'll just nod their head and go, yeah, that's great, rather than go, oh Jesus, you know. It is still like a bit of a stigma to say that you're a feminist. You know, a feminist, like, it's not about how they look or anything. Like, it's taken me so long to figure out that, like, you know, like, I don't have to project, like, my beliefs, you know, in the way I dress or anything like that, but it does help. You should check out my patch. It's a girl freaking herself.
Well, I definitely think that, like, a lot of people say that it's, like, it doesn't really mean anything anymore, but I still think it does. I mean, and I hate as well the way a lot of girls today think that feminists are freaks, do you know, like just bra burning and stuff, when like if you use your vote, if you have an opinion, if you get paid as much as a guy, then you're a feminist, because that's what it's about, equality. And it even matters to men, because I think if we didn't have the rights we have now, all their wives and girlfriends would be crazy, or probably as they'd say, like, crazier.
Burn your bra?
Is feminism really not show?
Not really.
Oh well.
Hi, Cara. How you doing?
Hello. How's it going, Hannah?
Good, thanks. Thanks for sticking around. So we're running about 10 minutes over, but I kind of, there's been really interesting discussion, so it's been difficult to kind of try and keep it tight. Now, sorry, that clip is fascinating in terms of just, so the film, I should point out to people, was produced in 2008. And just in terms of the kind of context of people's views from then versus now, it's a really interesting archival document in that sense, you know, talking about the archive. I had actually also intended on showing a different clip, but we're kind of short on time. So one of the things that kind of arose that for me when I was watching the film back the other day was, you know, the likes of kind of Alva Smith and some of your other contributors to the documentary are talking about kind of feminist issues that really still ring true, even in spite of you know, the repeal, the 8th movement, and in spite of kind of you know, domestic violence bills and waking feminist and Me Too movements and stuff. So I suppose, I mean, how, you know, what do you think that there's been much of a change, or, you know, do you see any kind of relevance of the?
Yeah, no, it's funny, and congratulations, Hannah, on tonight, and Livia as well. Actually, if it wasn't for Livia, this film probably would still be on that virtual dusty shelf on Vimeo, because I haven't actually watched it in a very long time, until I think last March when we were talking about it. But yeah, I mean, I think, you know, if I was, you know, I tend to be quite hopeful, and I think lots of things have changed. I mean, you know, I think at the time, and I am not a spokesperson on feminism necessarily, but you know, I do live my life as a woman, so I suppose that's that's experience enough. But, you know, and I always kind of, like, even when I was making the film, you know, I was kind of coming from a very very personal point of view, you know. I was kind of, you know, discovering kind of, you know, and trying to break down the word feminism and what that meant, and you know, and you know, it was kind of like questioning what was going on around me at the time in 2008. And you know, I was very much involved in kind of, you know, the DIY music scene, and you know, there were lots of stuff going on, like, you know, I don't know if you remember Showmer Spree on Autonomous Space there at the time, and like different kind of collectives within that, like RAG, a radical anarcho-feminist group, and lots of, you know, lots of other filmmakers like Paula Geraghty, who, you know, set up Trade Union TV, and like, you know, people like that who are huge influence in kind of, you know, in me as a filmmaker, you know, going out to question things. Yeah, I mean, like, to go back to your question, some things have changed and some things haven't. Yeah, and kind of, as I was looking through the film, you know, it's yeah, I'm coming back to a very kind of personal point of view, and I think we talked before about, you know, would I make the sequel to to The Future of Feminism? And no, I tend to kind of approach things in a much kind of, you know, a bite-size approach really at the moment. I mean, the film itself was very DIY, you know, it was kind of, I shot it, I, you know, edited, produced it, and, you know, just went out and made it. Yeah.
I think the sequel question kind of stems from the fact that as an archival document, you know, and it's only 13 years, which isn't a huge amount of time, but it, you know, looking at it now, you know, going back to the last question about how things changed, I mean, and looking at that Vox Pop, it does seem quite dated, but I really think at the nub of things, there's still so many kind of inequalities, you know, within society, and not just in terms of feminism. I mean, you know, we're going kind of towards, you know, racism, the likes of direct provision and all of that. But so the question of creating a sequel is just in terms of the kind of documentation and the archival value of that. But I suppose your current project really is a new form of an archive. It will be an archive in itself, but it is also dealing with archives. So do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, especially kind of in the last year, I've been doing a bit of a deep dive into kind of, you know, lesbian history and queer women's experience in Ireland. And I suppose that the kind of idea behind it came about in 2019, and Dublin Lesbian Line had celebrated a celebration called 40 Years Fearless. And I just kind of thought, you know, we don't have enough films about queer histories in general, but especially not about the lesbian, and particularly this thing called the lesbian line, which I've been becoming much more familiar with. So really in the last year, it's just been doing a lot of research, you know, kind of, and for anyone who doesn't know, because I was asked this question the other day, it's like, what are the lesbian lines? So I think initially the lesbian lines were set up as, you know, really kind of an underground network of helplines to be there for women who were questioning their sexuality, and as a support network. And as Ruth McCarthy, you know, said through the conversations, you know, there were 6 around Ireland, and as each one opened up, there were like beacons of light nearly. And I haven't actually forgot that, because, you know, you know, these are kind of brave, pioneering people who set up these lines, and, you know, I kind of want to celebrate them as kind of volunteers and activists, but also very interested in who is calling the lines, and maybe using the lesbian lines as, you know, charting a 40-year history, which seems like very broad, but I think, you know, I'm kind of, you know, becoming more and more focused on the lesbian lines and the power of one phone call. And the power that, you know, the phone call has, that, you know, it can save a life essentially. And ultimately it's coming down to that. But, you know, a celebration of hope, you know, of connection, of community and communities. And yeah, and I just, you know, a kind of hats off to Sonia and Ger there as well with Attitude, and the massive amount of work that, you know, they've put into that. So I've been talking to them and trying to get advice off them, and, you know, because
And what stage are you at in terms of that? I mean, have you kind of neared completion, or are you still looking for kind of information and people to get involved, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's very much in development at the moment, and you know, I am looking for anyone who would have called the lesbian lines over the last 40 years. So it could have been, you know, from the 80s right up until now, really, and also anyone who volunteered on the lesbian lines. So, you know, and it's trying to connect with these people. So it's very much research, building up a treatment and kind of building up a script. But you know, it's without people's stories. You know, it's kind of, we need people to to let us know what it was like, but I've found, like, the more people I've talked to, you know, there's a lot of enthusiasm about the project, and you know, that's kind of infectious. Yeah.
We will we'll share an email that people can get. Oh, there it is, popped up on the screen now, for people to get in touch with Cara and her team to contact them about the film. I should also say we do have we were very kindly loaned material from Dublin Lesbian Line and recordings from their anniversary event that you talked about, and we haven't managed to get them up on the timeline, but they are in the process, and they will be up in the next week or two. So watch out for that, and do also follow the Queer in Progress social media channels, because we do plan to kind of post up when there's new material going on to the website. But for now, Cara, thank you very much for being part of this, and best of luck with the Lesbian Lines work. I mean, as I say, it's fantastic and vital, and we really look forward to seeing it when it's kind of nearing completion and stuff. So
thanks Hannah, and congratulations again.
Thanks very much.
Very nice.
All right, well, I'm going to bring in our last guest of the night, and thank you for staying with us. I know it has dragged on a bit, but we're bringing on the last, and definitely by no means the least, and I dare I say, saving the best for last. So we'll bring on Sara Phillips in a second. Thanks. Hi, Sara. How are you doing? Thanks.
Hi, Anne. How are you?
Good, thanks. I should say again, Sara is, like Noah, you've had a day full of kind of trans visibility, and congratulations, and it's well worth kind of recognizing that. So I was somebody commented on Twitter the other day that I am now speaking to a living legend, and I would wholeheartedly agree with that. So Sara, for those who don't know, is chairperson of TENI Ireland, Trans Equality Network Ireland, and also apart from a very, very busy day job and every other board and committee that you're on, also has created the Irish Trans Archive, which is an absolutely invaluable resource for for the wider community in terms of understanding trans visibility and trans lives, and the fact that trans lives have existed throughout history and are one of our kind of most hidden histories, I suppose, really. So one of the entries that Sara has contributed to the Queer in Progress timeline is talking about the Friends of Eon. So maybe, Sara, would you maybe start off? I know we've got a lot to pack in, and we're going to try and be tight, but the Friends of Eon, what were they about?
Yeah, and first of all, thank you for having me on, and thank you for recognizing my friend's comments to you about telling you how to introduce me. I apologize for that. But yeah, I mean, the Friends of Eon, we're a trans group which were formed in Dublin in late 1978 by two trans women, Claire and Lola. Some of you may know Claire as Claire Farrell, who was a former vice chair at TENI and a long-standing trans activist over the last 40 years. It initially provided a social outlet for trans people who identified both as either transvestite or transsexual, but quickly it looked to establish support services and also rights. And, you know, back in the 1970s, we're all quite aware here, who listen in here, we've listened to all the wonderful presentations tonight about, you know, where the LGBT community was even back in the 70s and all the problems we had back then. But so for the fact that the trans community were actually forming at that point is very less known. It's much less known. But both Claire and Lola, you know, were members of a trans group in the UK at the time called the Beaumont Society. Ironically, the Beaumont Society had been formed by an Irish woman who lived in Dublin but used to travel to London at the time because didn't feel safe here. But on returning to Dublin after one of their like jaunts over there for an event, Claire and Lola sat down like in Bartley Duns at one point and kind of went like, is that it now? We can't have anything else. We've no more meetings, and decided, well, you know what? We should form an organization, a group. And they approached, they'd heard that there was a lesbian night on in the Parliament Inn, and they approached the manager there, Frank, and asked Frank, would it be possible to get a room? And that's what they did. Mm-hmm. And so they contacted all the other members of the Irish members of the Beaumont Society and formed the support group, or formed a group, a social group initially. And I suppose in the very early days, that was what it was supposed to be, a social group. They advertised for people to come along. One of the famous adverts they had in the paper at the time was "Come dressed if you wish," which is kind of, there was all sorts of commentary about whether it was a nudist club or not. But also, it very quickly, they started to reach out into other areas. And what they did was they spoke to the Gardaí about safety, about supporting the community around safety. They were interviewed by Pat Kenny on the RTE1 radio show, and his radio show. But when one member of their group actually was on the Late Late Show in 1979, there was actual uproar. In fact, the wife of the then Taoiseach, Jack Lynch, Maureen Lynch, actually led the charge with that uproar and was ably supported, I think, by the Irish Decency League, or the Irish League of Decency, which is, I'm sure we all would wonder where they are today.
I think they were the same ones who campaigned against the lesbian nuns on the Late Late as well.
Exactly, that's right. And but then by 1980, Claire Farrell, you know, also appeared on RTE's program called Summertime, and I know you've linked that, which is now up on the RTE archive, which is great because I've been looking for it for a long time. Where a camera and interviewer followed her around a shopping centre, interviewed her about being trans, and also then joined the Friends of Ian at one of their meetings and interviewed some of the others. You know, but I think that there's a critical piece of information that I like to talk about, because if you don't mind, if I can get it in here.
Yeah.
Around that period of time, there was a meeting between the Friends of Ian and the committee in the Hirschfield Centre, because it had opened up at this stage, and about using the space there for the Friends of Ian meetings. And the Friends of Ian
I should point out to viewers who we've got a lot of kind of a wide variety of viewers, and we're very used to talking specifically to the queer community. The Hirschfield Centre was the first LGBT community centre it wasn't the first community centre in Dublin, but it was kind of established in the early 70s and was in Temple Bar, and it ran nightclub and also then kind of community groups and stuff like that, and it was a kind of a precursor to Outhouse, which is now on Capel Street. So sorry, I just needed to add that in for context.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, you mustn't always assume that the individuals know, the audience knows what we're talking about here. But I mean, so obviously the Friends of Ian, met with the committee in Hirschfield Centre or representatives of theirs about using the space, possibility of using the space. But when the meeting was over, the Friends of Ian went back to deliberate about whether they should or not. They eventually went back to the Hirschfield Centre and said, no, thank you, it's okay, we're not going to use it. But there was never any indication as to why or what, if there was any issues, etc. And it only came to light about 2 years ago that actually because that committee was made up of a mixture of both transsexual and transvestite members, and predominantly transvestite members on the actual committee, who were at that point mostly married heterosexual men, they decided they weren't going to get associated, in the words of one individual, with the criminals, which obviously homosexuality was still criminalized. But what it did do was it kind of separated the trans community for a long, long time from the rest of the LGBT community, from the gay community. And it took quite a long time to bring that back together again. But I also, it had a negative effect on the group. It meant that then some of the transsexual members of that group started to disassociate itself slowly but surely, including Claire Farrell in the early 80s actually stepped away because she felt it was more about social event rather than a rights, or a social group rather than a rights group. And she stepped away herself. But, you know, it continued on into kind of the 1990s. And then into the early 2000s, it really left kind of the older members of the group continued meeting in their homes, you know, hosting each other. But it really, it's kind of period of time is that kind of up until the early to mid 90s. It finished.
So then I suppose in 2003, I know we're kind of pushing it for time, but as I say, we have a lot to pack in, and there's so much that we could cover, and really we should be acknowledging Dr. Lydia Foy, who really was the one who pushed, certainly in the courts, who pushed for recognition of
gender recognition.
Thank you. But unfortunately, we are limited on time. So I just want to kind of touch on TENI. And I mean, they're a really vital service for the trans community in Ireland and for kind of pushing for trans rights. So they came about then in 2003, was it?
Yeah, the first iteration of TENI was actually formed in Cork in 2003, late 2003. Well, I think it was 2004 by the time they'd actually sat down and had a conversation, a proper meeting. But basically it was formed by 6 individuals. Nick Kravchenko is a Russian trans guy, Diane Hughes, Sarah Jane Cromwell, Linda Sheridan, who we all know and love, and 2 individuals from Waterford, Ciara and Catherine. And they kind of formed that initial group and started to work towards, because it was based around a report that a Nexus report, which Collins and Sheens had produced around access to healthcare, which is kind of ironic. Listening to what Noah was talking about earlier, you know, the fact that we're still worried about this, and this is a report going back to 2004, and it's very similar to the stuff that we're dealing with today. But that kind of, to a certain degree, fizzled out a bit, and Sarah Cromwell was left more or less with the organization with a few other individuals helping. And she then, in 2005, came together with what was then the Trans Peer Support Group in Dublin, and through some protracted negotiations, eventually TENI, as we all know it again, was reformed in early 2006. I think the first meeting was in the latter part of April 2006. And it became a voluntary organization with a much more stable organization. And then we were lucky enough then in 2010 to get some funding from Atlantic Philanthropies, as a lot of LGBT groups did, in order to kind of develop where we are today, to get that starting point and become professional. Brilliant.
Well, the other thing that, as I said in the introduction, is very close to your heart, and an incredible resource, or, you know, soon to be resource when it's made public, is your own archive, the Irish Trans Archive. And can you tell us a bit about how that came about?
Yeah, well, I mean, the archive itself, I suppose, came about, first of all, initially because I was collecting, you know, to use the words of a good old friend of mine who's no longer with us, Denise Hurley, I was looking for my tribe. So you looked and searched for every single morsel of newspaper article or media or whatever you could come across over from going back into the 70s. And so I was collecting all this stuff. I was keeping it as much as I could. I was still researching it. And I think it was in the latter, kind of in around 2014, 13, 14, I was talking to a few people about the lack of trans visibility in the queer archive. And I had all of this other stuff. There's still bits and pieces of it in the GCN section, but there's very little of it there. And I knew there was a lot more stuff there. I knew a lot more people. I knew a lot of individuals. of the work that was going on. So a conversation at the latter part of 14 and 15, when we were going through gender recognition, was around that somebody should be archiving what's happening now. And I was kind of saying, well, I'm involved in everything that's going on now, and I have all this back catalogue sort of stuff. Maybe I should step forward. And I've always had an interest in history. So it was about that hidden, silent history that you were talking about earlier, you know, the overlooked stories that within the wider LGBT history is not there. And I felt also talking to young trans people, they had no sense of actually trans people have been here for centuries. They've been here since throughout the whole of history. And that's why I haven't just focused on the last 40 years or 45 years or whatever. I've tried to focus on researching back into the 18th and 19th century and even further back if necessary. And if you just look at the work in the 18th century, I mean, I constantly coming across names and more stories and more stories and more stories and it's all Irish specific. And one of those links that I've been benefiting from is that queer culture link, which I'm part of also. And some of the other individuals researching their own stories or their own issues, then sharing that. And you know, also that's how we've got to know each other. You know, some of the work you did last year around the GCN side of things, you've shared some of the stuff that you've found as well. And I think that's the collaboration is what's key here. But it was also about trying to provide that source for, you know, the trans community specifically, but also the wider LGBT community. You know, and as you say, it will be, hopefully it will be live soon. I've irishtransarchive.com is nearly there. I'm still working.
That was going to be my last question.
Live,
no, and I mean, I really, I you know, as we said earlier on in the conversation, I mean, it's really about fostering those links and trying to kind of expand on those histories. And I think it's, you know, I'm really excited about the Trans Archive and about having kind of made this connection and hopefully kind of sharing information together and working towards stuff. And we do, as I say, there is an entry on the timeline at the moment about Friends of Eon. I do have other material from GCN that I researched, but it's all kind of a work in progress, hence the title Queer in Progress. So we will be bringing a lot more of that into it. And we do want to hear from people who maybe have their own trans histories, their own lesbian, feminist, female identifying and bi histories. So just the last thing. So thank you very much, Sarah. I really, really appreciate your contribution. And we're actually going to finish up. So I have a few personal thank yous to say. First of all, thank you all for watching. Thank you so much to all my guests. It's been a really kind of fruitful conversation, I think, and everybody's brought so much to the project. I want to also say thank you to anybody who's already contributed material, and I really look forward to hearing from anybody else who wants to contribute material. You can email me at hannah@projectartcentre.ie. And as I say, we are trying to focus on those kind of hidden histories. So if you have work that you want to, or material that you want to contribute to that, it would be fantastic. Or even suggestions of what we could research going beyond that. I also very much want to say a thank you to Livia for kind of bringing this into the conversation and opening it up, and also then to Project Art Centre for allowing the space to create this conversation. And a personal thank you to the comms department, to Circa and Astrid for putting up with my little hissy fits about you know, getting the material out there, but they do Trojan work. And lastly, I want to say thank you so much to GCN. Please support it. Text the number that's on screen, but also go on to gcn.ie and you can buy that poster there and other material. And especially thank you so much to Katie Donoghue, who's been in the background running the whole thing, and we're sorry for keeping her up so late. And yeah, keep archiving and keep sharing. Thanks.